Hello and welcome, my friend, to Season 2 of the Minnesota Gardening Podcast. I am just so honored to have you here with us today. In this Season 2 of the Minnesota Gardening Podcast, we are going to take a deep dive, exploring seed starting, spring gardening, and growing your own meals. In these 9 episodes, we'll take you on a journey from discovering treasure troves in the Smithsonian to a masterclass in seed starting to planning for preserving your harvest. And you can find all of these episodes and links to the items we discuss in each episode at minnesotagardening.com. So please also do me a favor. If you find and love the Minnesota Gardening Podcast, leave the show a positive rating and review wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts, because I could not be more proud of how this season turned out. And I just want to say a quick thank you before we get started to all of our incredible guests. There are 9 episodes, and it was a lot of work, and I love every single one of them. And so our incredible guests, our awesome collaborators, and generous teachers who helped to make this first full season released on the first day of meteorological spring happen. So that is wonderful, and please make sure to subscribe to the Minnesota Gardening Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, because Season 3 will be coming out soon, and there may also be some bonuses to Season 2. Enjoy. All right. Welcome, everyone. We have another great episode with 2 wonderful guests. This is the first time that we've had multiple guests on a single episode here today for the Minnesota Gardening Podcast. And today we have 2 wonderful people from Dream of Wild Health. It's a 10-acre farm north of Hugo here in Minnesota. And we have with us Hope Flanagan, who is from the Turtle Clan, and she is an elder who teaches about plants and wild plant gathering. She is also a storyteller in the Native community. And then also Jessika Greendeer is the seed keeper and farm manager at Dream of Wild Health, and is a Ho-Chunk tribal member from Baraboo, Wisconsin, and member of the Deer Clan. So Hope and Jessika, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity to visit with others and show the same interest in plants and the understanding of our connection to them, or the valuing of connection to them.
Absolutely. I just appreciate your time and everybody being here. So, Jessika, could you start out and tell everyone what Dream of Wild Health is, and what you guys do at the farm, and about your mission?
Yeah. Dream of Wild Health, our mission is to restore health and well-being in the Native community by recovering knowledge of and access to healthy Indigenous foods, medicines, and lifeways. And I did want to mention that we are now a 30-acre farm. We have been on our 10-acre farm for about 15 years, and we just recently, last year, purchased another 20 acres that will be growing into some agroforestry as well as an incubating farmer program.
Wow, that's very exciting. 30 acres is a beautiful thing. So that's great. Sorry, I got that wrong in the intro there. But with that, Hope, what do you feel is the work that Dream of Wild Health does, and how does it connect to your community?
Oh, what a wonderful question. Yes, well, there's such an important connection for our young people too. We've always had a connection of growing seeds and growing leaders, because just for us to hold this knowledge isn't enough. We have to make sure young ones are receiving this information and able to grow with what we're finding out and what we're seeing as we continue to see what the plants are bringing to us and what the plants are giving to the people.
I was doing some research and looking around to see what would be best to talk about today. And one of the most beautiful things that I read was from one of your campers. She's 15-year-old Ava Hartwell, and it was in the Star Tribune. And she said, the rule is that you don't work in the field if you're having a bad day. You will spread negative emotions in the plants. And I absolutely loved that. So can you talk a little more about how you're teaching and the importance of making sure to carry on the tradition of Indigenous plants here in Minnesota?
Yeah, absolutely. I can get started with that. So what we're talking about at Dream of Wild Health is how we're in relation to not only the plants that we're stewarding or growing in the gardens, but also the native plants, and including the life of the soil and within the soil. So we're talking about being in relationship to everything in our ecosystem. We I often tell the youth about our indigenous seeds being like babies, and I think many gardeners can also relate to that when we're thinking about the young seedlings or seeds that we're starting in our gardens and how we baby them and bring them along, and then we transplant them and sort of, they're in that walking phase at that point, but we're able to witness their entire life cycle within a season for many of our annual plants. So thinking of all of our plants as babies or as children, it helps sort of create a calmness within each of us. We have to get into that special place and be able to set that aside so we can give our full attention and energy into the plants that are around us. So that's one of the aspects of what we talk about with our youth. And I think so many of the youth do have that complete change within them when they have to, I too have to remind myself to sort of center myself before I come into the garden, because it's not just a place where we grow things. It's a place where there's a spiritual connection and a spiritual relationship brought in between humans and plants. Hope, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Oh, I would love to, because you've hit the nail on the head so beautifully, Jessika. When I do an introduction, or one of the ways I've always heard introductions is when you say, this is who I am, and in the end you say, Niji B'Madazik, and that means our fellow living beings. And that means you're not just talking to the humans, but you're talking to the plants, the insects, the soil, Mother Earth, the sun, all the living beings that in our paradigm, I guess is the way to say it, they were here before us. They're our elders. It's almost like it's turned upside down from how this society might see it, in that in this society sometimes we think we're really knowledgeable and in charge, but in our stories, in our traditional way of being, we're the newcomers and we're not the elders. Our elders are the ones that were here before us, which includes the stars, the soil, Mother Earth, the insects, the plants, and we're here because of their kindness.
And how are you helping to educate and teach? Or I guess a better question would be, are you working to educate and teach folks outside of your community and things like that? Like what kinds of things do non-native folks need to know and should know about indigenous seeds and indigenous plants and that kind of growing them aspects?
I would like to start on that one. I think if we can challenge this society's paradigm and say, remember, we are the newcomers, that without the little organisms in the soil, without the soil itself, without those beautiful seeds, without the plants, we don't exist at all. And we're the last ones. But in our minds, even in the traditional legends, they say we're the cranky babies. We get here and we think we know all that, and we know very, very little because we're the last ones here. So if we can start to reshape and think, without those insects in the soil, without the, nematodes and all the little biome that's in the soil, we don't exist. If we don't honor those plants, if we don't honor and thank those plants, if we don't live in harmony with them, we're not going to continue. I'm 64 years old, and I spoke to my elder this morning just to get, I always talk to her to get charged up, and she said the same thing, that as she woke up this morning, she was thinking about, we've got to make that harmony in our own beings so that they don't have to put up with our nonsense.
And just in general, gardening is such a great thing for that, for connections with the soil and connections with the plants. And Jessika, as you were talking about, I had to laugh about calling the little plants babies, because that's exactly what we do in our house. There are babies, and both of my daughters, they check on the babies and make sure that they're doing okay for us. So it's a very wonderful connection that goes through there. And another point of connection with native plants and indigenous plants is that we've been looking through, when we got in our house, Sean Sherman's sous chef cookbook, and was going through that. And it was like a lot of the recipes and a lot of the things in there have ingredients that are just completely currently inaccessible and not able for me to just go to the store or anything like that to get. And so we want to grow things that we are able to use the cookbook this coming summer. So what, thoughts do you have, and how could a non-native person like me best accomplish that because there's to make corn flour and different things like that. What advice or what thoughts do you have as to how I should, or we should approach that process?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brad. So I have two thoughts about that. One, even if you are non-native, there is ancestral land that you reside upon and you grow and live on. And so in recognition of that, I think that would be okay to grow ancestral seeds of the land that you live, work, and play on. And then the other side of that is, there are so many indigenous seeds that are not available commercially. And so it's very difficult to connect with some of those seeds or purchase some of those seeds. A lot of the work that we're doing with seed rematriation is finding where those seeds are. Some of them are within institutions, museums, land universities, so many different hiding places. And so a lot of the work that we're also doing is trying to find those seeds, bring them to Dream of Wild Health to grow, and also share them back with their home communities. The indigenous seeds that we do grow at Dream of Wild Health are connected to many of the tribes of the upper Midwest. So that stretches from, what is now known as Michigan through Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and of course the Dakotas. I also want to mention that, indigenous foods, I think there are so many people who don't understand what indigenous food or maybe where they come from. But if you think about our solanaceous plants, potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, chilies, corn, beans, squash, all of those originated from the Americas before they were taken to different places around the world. And so I think it's also very important for people to understand what their ancestral background, we're able to, at Dream of Wild Health, give a voice to those indigenous seeds that we steward. And it's also important that we don't forget about all of the other ones who are out there and looking for their people too, and for us to connect with. So thinking of, our different legumes or even carrots or beets, and thinking about where they came from in the world, and if that is part of your ancestral background, I really encourage you to find the seeds that your ancestors ate. It's not about the seeds that your grandmother ate, but what your grandmother's grandmother ate. And I think the world would be such a different place if we were all able to connect with our ancestral seeds, be able to grow those and help increase the biodiversity of the open pollinated seeds that are still out there waiting for a good human steward to take care of them.
I'd like to add to that, too, is that so much of what's right here, right now, is interconnected. So an example of that is that the soil is there's still things in the soil waiting for plants to come back. And as we know, if you plant a native plant in your garden, it's going to be more bioavailable to the insects, to the birds, to any other animals that might be nearby. A great example of that is just this past weekend, I was working with the Shakopee tribe, and they were so happy that they had made space for the wild rice to return. And because the wild rice had returned to one area, then the muskrats were able to return. And then with the muskrats returning, then the northern harriers, the certain types of hawks, those in the rough-legged hawks, were able to return. So nurturing space, making space for those living beings that have been here, that multiply the effect of life that's been here, that was here for thousands of years, to recognize that. So part of it is for humans to be outside, spend time with those plants, and develop a connection with those plants and seeds and the soil itself. So we know that if we're going to be able to have access to nutrition, our bodies have to be in tune with what the nutrition is in the soil. So we're trying to match that, whatever that biodiversity that's in the soil can match what's in our gut. So it's so important for us to be able to be in contact, put your hands in the soil, walk in the woods, be in contact with what's actually out there, so that we can learn to protect it and respect it and realize the incredible value that all those other beings have on this life plane.
I had gotten in touch with my friends at Wajupi in order to talk to them for the same reasons why we're talking today. And they said, no, thank you. You guys need to talk to Dream of Wild Health. So they sent me your direction as well. So they are...
We have a connection with their biology team that I'm really grateful that we're working with their biology team, because they're looking at not just restoring and counting. We did the first ever reservation-wide count at Shakopee this last Sunday, so for birds, and they were saying, well, let's do it for plants, let's do it for insects, let's start really looking and valuing our relatives and the different forms that they have, respect them, and they can make a space for them to return.
You can add to that list back in, I don't remember if it was March or April. I live just right outside of the Shakopee-Mdewakanton Sioux community, and there were just a bunch of sandhill cranes that were hanging out. And that was the first time that I've ever seen sandhill cranes within our area here. So it's exciting to see a lot of that by investing in native communities and native plant communities, to see having those things happen, just like you were talking about. So that's a wonderful thing. Jessika, I'd like to circle back a little bit. You talked a little bit about rematriation of seeds, and I find that absolutely fascinating. I hadn't really thought about the fact that a lot of the indigenous seeds need to be found and I don't know if rediscovered is a terrible word to use for that, but relocated and found again. How does that happen? Like, how has the vast majority of it all been lost to history, or how are you able to find it, and what are you finding for indigenous seeds?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brad, and I'm grateful that I'm kind of a history nerd, and so I do enjoy, looking in old archives, looking in old manuscripts as something that I've always enjoyed doing, and now I'm even more grateful that I have, it's not just little bits of knowledge that I'm able to learn, but actually making connections and being able to locate seed and bring them home a little more than 100 years ago, at least for my tribe. And I know there's a lot of commonalities between my tribe and other tribes, but it all depends on sort of when we had colonizers come in or settlers come and sort of disrupt the life that our ancestors once lived. And so, if we're thinking a little more than 100 years ago, the thought was that there would no longer be any American Indians or indigenous peoples on this continent, thinking that at some point we would be extinct. And that goes to, even the boarding school era, which was not that long ago as well. And in some places, the world's still happening. But there were so many pieces of our culture that were taken from us or stripped from us. And that was not only our different ceremonies that we were able to perform, different objects that were sacred to us, but also our seeds. And so much of the work that we're doing is looking in these older archives. And I'm grateful there was an ethnobotanist who had visited my tribe back in 1914. And so he had made documents, had visited different Ho-Chunk families, made lists of different crops that they were growing, whether they were domesticated or wild plants. And then he also used the phonetic spelling for some of those crops. And so going through that document, we're able to find some of those seeds, and many of them by description only. But many of my ancestral seeds had found their way into the Oscar Will seed house. And so Oscar Will was this huge seed guy back in the 1920s. And through that, his son had then taken those seeds, had, grown a little bit more with them, but then he had deposited those seeds with the USDA seed bank. And so the USDA actually still continued to grow those seeds out on a maintenance schedule. So maybe it's once every 4 years or once every 7 years, but those seeds continued to stay alive within the USDA's possession. And so many of those seeds were then reclaimed not only by my tribe, but so many other tribes across America, where they were able to access the seeds and start to grow them again, and getting them to the point that they can actually share those seeds with other tribal members or people within the community.
That is all so A, tragic, and B, fascinating that you are able to find where that is. And so how close to the original, or more, how close do you think the indigenous seed is to what your ancestors were growing?
So I have to, a lot of it is having the hope, the hope that it wasn't cross-pollinated or cross-contaminated with other seed. And so, of course, corn is something easy you can look at and sort of identify if there's a visitor, visiting pollen that had come into the field, and you can, remove it from your cob or remove it from your seed. But there's, I don't know, you kind of just have to have a lot of trust. And of course, some seeds will change over time. And that's one of the aspects that we do teach the youth, is that, we're continuing to grow these seeds every year or every other year, depending on their growing cycle. But it's all about making those seeds stronger. Those seeds become more resilient every time we put them into the earth's womb. And, the seeds that continue to grow with us are just getting more and more resilient and acclimated to climate chaos. And so there are some changes that will occur over time, but, for the most part, within that is still the heart of where that seed came from.
And I had also read where I didn't realize it had been enlarged to 30 acres, but with your new purchase of land, that you are installing hedges and tree barriers and things like that to try and reduce contamination from non-native seeds. How is that working?
So it's still a work in progress, Brad. The land was previously farmed conventionally. So the land has been in cover crop the last 2 years, or last season and this season, and we'll be beginning to plant our trees later this year. So that's really exciting. It's not only to provide that sort of that windbreak for many of our indigenous seeds that we are going to be growing on that property, but it's also providing that habitat for not only the insects and the wildlife, the birds, and then creating more biodiversity within that soil.
And we are getting close to the end time here for our chat, but I've got a couple last questions for you, and Hope, I'm going to throw this one to you. This is from one of our community members, Jen Hall, and her question, I think this is perfect for you and your storytelling as well. And she asks, what makes you optimistic about the future when you look at what Native youth are doing out of?
Well, I see the energy of the youth. I'm grateful for that. And Jen used to work at Dream of Wild Health. She's a wonderful asset. What makes me optimistic is that our old way of being, it nurtures the physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental way of being in communication. So we don't have to get overwhelmed with what the physical evidence is, because Jessika's completely right. And stating about climate chaos, and on top of that, the challenges of dealing with genetically modified seed and the pesticides, herbicides, and challenges that are being put into the soil. So to see the young ones being educated about this so that they can value some of our highly nutrition-based foods, and they can see that you have to preserve the soil and re-enrich and regenerate the soil, that's where the food actually is. I mean, we could eat things that look like food but truly aren't food because they're so depleted. So as we educate them, as we get them thinking about this, all of it's so connected. We can't just say we're interested in a seed. We have to think about we're interested in the water that gets to the seed, the air that is connected to the seed, the organisms in the soil, as they sort of re-educate or rethinking how it's all interconnected, that they can bring about change on those different levels.
I don't think there's anything more I could add to that. I will just say that working at Dream of Wild Health has been, it's my dream job, and I'm sure Hope feels the same way. It's knowing that the traditions that we've carried with us, that were passed down to us, will continue to move on into the future. There are so many of our youth that are just hungry and ready to carry on those bundles of responsibility into the future. And I can't I'm always so hopeful, and it brightens up my day to be able to spend time with the youth and being able to see all of that excitement within each and every one of them, whether they're going to continue on to be a farmer or a seed keeper or working with our wild plant relatives or a chef. There's so much excitement, and it provides me a lot of hope for the future.
Beautiful. So last question I've got for whomever would like to answer it is what action steps, what things would you like all Minnesotans, native and non-native, to be doing, Minnesota gardeners, that is, to learn and bring us back closer to where the land was before it was colonized?
I want to speak to intent, because sometimes we don't see the results of our intent, but the intent itself is so important. If we go forward with the intent of speaking for the trees, speaking for the soil, speaking and presenting what we can do the best we can every day, and look for the beauty. Look for it, because sometimes it can be overwhelming. I'm not going to deny that. But if we look at, the babies, and seeing them sprouting and seeing their ability to come forward, even though we might have a drought or we have a challenge that's going on, who shows up, which plants show up, which birds show up. Those are the kinds of things that if we can be speaking forward for them and walking forward with the intent of speaking for life with a capital L.
Brad, I just wanted to add one thing. I think it's, for gardeners, I think we all carry that optimism and knowing that the energy we're putting into our gardens result in a fruitful harvest. And I think it's so important, whether people are native, non-native, regardless of where they come from in the world, it's all about forming that relationship, just as Hope mentioned. And it's so important to think of our future generation. Every action and inaction we have and what we take in the ecosystem around us has consequences to that. And I know you can best relate to that as well, Brad, knowing that you can look into the eyes of your daughters and say that you did the very best that you could to make sure that they still continue to have soil to be able to grow those foods for their own children or their grandchildren. So yeah, I think it's important to try to think more toward the future and seeing how our actions will, either leave something better or need something for our offspring to improve upon.
Well, Hope Flanagan and Jessika Greendeer from Dreamer Wild Health, thank you so much for coming on today and just chatting with us all and sharing the story of Dreamer Wild Health and what we can all be doing together to make the world a better place. So I really appreciate the work you're doing and appreciate you and your time here today.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much. See what I mean? That was just an absolute joy of an episode. I'm so happy that you were able to hear that conversation that we had. It was just really enlightening for me, and I hope it was for you as well. And if you really liked that conversation, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as give us a rating and a review. You have no idea how important that is in making sure that the Minnesota Gardening Podcast gets found by other people. It's just awesome. And so I thank you so much for doing that. And if you want more information about Dream of Wild Health or any of our podcast episodes, go to minnesotagardening.com and you'll see season 2 right at the top. Or if you're listening to this at a later date, you can search for season 2 and see the show notes for all of the episodes that we have here in this season, including the next one we have with Seed Saver Exchange, talking about trends in seeds for 2022.